What's going on, folks? Welcome to Bible Study. If it's your first time here, my name is Philip Godfrey. If you're returning, welcome back, Bible Study family. And so today, it is a recorded video. I know we're not live like we usually are on Sundays at 8 p.m. I've been traveling with at one of my brother's men's conferences, and so I'm getting back rejuvenated and resting and spending this time with my family since I've been away for a few days. So thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you for continuing to walk through the text with us as we continue to complete the assignment that the Father gave us this year. And for those who don't know, this is weekly Bible study, and weekly Bible study is built off of the scriptures in Matthew 6:33, where here the Messiah tells us to seek ye first the kingdom of the Father and his righteousness, and all things shall be added unto you. So we gather here to do just that, to see, seek, and serve the kingdom of the Father. And this year we are on assignment to walk through the entirety of the Bible, book by book and chapter by chapter. And so today we will be looking at the books of Obadiah, Jonah, and Micah. Okay, Obadiah, Jonah, and Micah. Let's go ahead and jump in, all right? And so, a little bit of background on Obadiah. Obadiah is the shortest book of the Old Testament, and the book really speaks about from a theme of prophetic destruction. It speaks to the prophetic destruction and judgment of the people of Edom, all right? And these people, the Edomites, are the descendants of Esau, the twin brother of Jacob, and this is going to make sense in a second. But as I have said, as we walk throughout the especially the prophetic books of this study, that these prophetic strategies or these prophetic kind of instances or the prophetic information, thank you, Holy Spirit, the prophetic information that is shared with us oftentimes has immediate fulfillments and also delayed fulfillments as well. Not delayed, but future fulfillments as well. And so today is going to be one of those situations where, as we're looking here at the book of Obadiah, we see more immediate fulfillments to the judgment that the Father is decreeing over the people, but also the future judgments that are being decreed as part of this prophecy as well. So the cyclical aspect of biblical prophecy, but we're not going to get into that all of that right now. And so, as we move into the book of Obadiah, what we see here is that Obadiah is decreeing, at the leading of the Father, that Esau, the descendants of Edom, the Edomites, that they will be completely removed from the earth because of how they have helped and fought against Jacob. All right. So the issue here is what was going on when Jerusalem fell and when Judah fell. There was a group, the Edomites rose up and they helped capture some of the Judeans who ran away. They even took some of them as slaves themselves. They gave them over to the captives, to those who were taking them into captivity. And so the Father had issue with this. He decrees here that they should have been more intentional in helping their brother, because when it all boils down, they are brothers in lineage. So they should have been more intentional in helping and had a heart and a posture of assisting Jacob and assisting Judah with the captivity and with the fight that they were in, really. But they did not do that. They instead oppressed them even further. And the text tells us in verse 10 that because of how they treated Jacob, they will be cut off forever. All right. And so when I speak here about like longer term fulfillments of these words, and if we've seen this, let me take a step back for a second. We've seen this prophecy go forward as well as we looked at some of the previous prophetic books. I believe in the book of Ezekiel, and perhaps in the book of Jeremiah as well. But don't quote me on that. I know it's in Ezekiel. But what we see is that the Father he's decreeing judgment on those nations as well, like Babylon and Assyria. And Edom was one of the nations that he decreed judgment on through the prophet Ezekiel, for the latter days, in judging the people who have harmed the nations that have harmed his chosen people. And so this isn't an isolated prophecy or anything like that. So, but when I speak about longer term fulfillments of these words, when we see terms in the text, and it's likening Edom to an eagle or a nest of stars, etc., those types of things. When we see these prophetic linkages, we can look here and see the thread that is coming throughout the text. So what we saw previous to this and in studies of the books before this, we saw that there are nations that have aligned themselves as eagles, that there are nations even then that had aligned them, and the Father had decreed to be as eagles, likened themselves as unto eagles. And so there are still nations that have come against the Father's set apart people in our day to day, outside of those that are grafted in, of course. And then these nations have identified themselves in this way. And just like Edom and eagles are aligned, the eagle nations will be judged as well because they are Edomites. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Like they have aligned themselves with the Edomites. I'm not saying that they are Edomites. Every single solitary person is an Edomite there. I'm not saying that. But they have aligned themselves thematically, or with their belief systems or even with their actions to Edom. And so that's kind of hopefully that makes sense. What I'm saying there is that that's the continuing thread of the text being pulled throughout to where we see things today. All right, that there are still nations today that have aligned themselves against the Father's chosen people, and they have done things against the Father's chosen people when they should have been serving them and helping them and assisting them and fighting with them or on their behalf. They have fought against them, and the Father will do for those people just as he decreed that he would do over Edom, because they have aligned themselves as Edom and Esau. Does that make sense? All right. And so the text here goes on to speak of the day of the Lord. It talks about that as well in the book of Obadiah, and how in that day the tables will turn and Jacob will consume and devour Esau, and that this is the Father's decree. So this is also pointing to a future point in time, the day of the Lord. We have not experienced the day of the Lord yet. So he's talking about the day of the Lord in the future, this day of judgment, that at that time there will be a shift that takes place. And Esau, as we saw the prophecy from over in Jacob, or the blessing from over in the book of Genesis, that Esau will rule over his brother, but in the end the brother will come up higher. So we see here is this is just a continuation of what the Father has already been decreeing and doing. But in this day, that day of judgment, the day of the Lord, the day of Yahuwah, that Jacob will then rise and consume and devour Esau, and this is the Father's decree. All right. So I say all that to say that even in these smaller books, or we consider the shorter books or whatever, that there is still information, there's still depth there. I have run across someone shared with me, Brother Andre shared with me a message that I think was about 2 hours long, just on the book of Obadiah. And so there's a lot of meat there. So please go and read and study that out for yourself. All right. Let's move into the book of Jonah. All right. The book of Jonah. A lot of people know the story of Jonah in the book of Jonah, right? And so a little background on Jonah. Jonah is a prophet, and Jonah is living during the time of Jeroboam. Okay. He's living during the time of the king of Jeroboam II. And during that time, and as the book begins, we see that Jonah receives instructions from the Father to go to Nineveh. All right. And Nineveh is a city in the Assyrian regime, or in the Assyrian nation. So Nineveh is an Assyrian city. Yes, these are the same Assyrians who the Father sent to capture Israel, the northern kingdom, and take them into exile. But at the time when when Jonah's prophesying, or when this is writing about, at that time, Assyria and Israel and Judah, they were cordial. There were no issues. They were not under any threat to Assyria. So Jonah did not. When Jonah receives these instructions to go to Nineveh, the Father is sending him to foreigners. He's sending him to foreigners. He's sending him to a far off land. He's sending him to people who are not like him, who are not a part of the Father's covenant. I just want to make sure that we understand that. And so he tells him to go and prophesy against the city of Nineveh because of their wickedness. Jonah ultimately did not like these instructions because he knew that the Father was trying to be merciful to these people, to the people of Nineveh. And Jonah, the hardness of his heart, Jonah did not want them, the people of Nineveh, to receive grace and mercy. Let me make a statement. It is not our opportunity or job to determine who receives grace and mercy. The Father will give grace and mercy to whom he desires to give grace and mercy whenever he decides to give grace and mercy to those people. The reality of the fact is that you and I do not deserve any of the grace and mercy that the Father shows us or provides for us, and we should not be the determining factor in whether someone else receives that same measure of grace that you so freely and happily walk in. Let me get off of that. So, Jonah had decided that he didn't want them to receive the grace and mercy of the Father. So what does Jonah do? He does the exact opposite of what the Father says. He does not go to Nineveh. He turns the opposite way. He finds a boat and he's going to Tarshish. Okay? He's going to Tarshish. And so while he finally finds a boat. And while he's on the way to Tarshish, the text tells us that the sea became very rough, and the people, it was so bad. I guess it was like a storm or something. I'm gonna just say it was a storm. The storm was so bad, the sea was so rough that the people, the seamen, like these are sailors. The sailors thought that they were going to die. They started lightening the ship and throwing things that they needed off into the water. They thought they were going to die. They even began to pray to their gods. So we see now that these are foreigners. They even began, they're probably pagan, but they began to pray unto their gods to see what was going on. What is the cause for all of this? What is the cause for them being in a position to potentially lose their life? While all of this is going on, Jonah, the text tells us, is sleeping. The issue that I have with Jonah here, and I have a few issues with Jonah, but the issue that I have with him here is that while everyone else is freaking out, Jonah is sleeping. All of these people, all of these sailors, this entire ship, everything, all the possessions on there are in danger, are in jeopardy because of Jonah and his disobedience. And he is sleeping while his disobedience is putting the entire ship in danger. The only reason they were in danger is because Jonah was with them. They don't know this man. They just picked him up. He paid them a fare probably or whatever. They have no tie to him. But he is the reason for every source and every piece of dysfunction that is going on in their life in that season and in that moment. And he is sleeping. It angers me how let's keep going. And so eventually, I'm sparing you some of the details. Go read the book yourself, because I could be telling you anything. I'm not, but I could be. I want you to believe the Bible and not me. So eventually they find out that it's Jonah's fault, that he's the issue. He admits that he's been disobedient to the Father, Yahuwah, and they're like, why would you ever be disobedient to the God of Israel? And eventually after some conversation back and forth, they throw Jonah overboard. All right. And once they throw him overboard, everything calms down for him. This is also, let me take a detour for a second. The reality is this, and people don't like to talk about it, but let's talk about it. Your disobedience affects other people, whether you like it or not. Our disobedience has far-reaching implications, even for those that we are not directly, like our family, that we are not directly integrated with, but are in the peripheral of our lives. And so when you say no to an assignment, that doesn't just affect you. When we say no because we want to be comfortable, or we don't like the people over there, or we don't want the God to do it for them or whatever, it doesn't just affect you. It doesn't just affect those people, because the Ninevites were being affected, but it's also affecting this group of sailors that have nothing to do with what's going on. And so sometimes your disobedience is causing chaos in the entirety of a situation. And we must begin to see if the reason for some of the chaos that we're seeing in our lives is that our disobedience, do we have somebody around us who's disobedient? Do we need to get rid of them people? And see if your situation calms, if your sea calms from the storms that you see because you have a disobedient people in your circle, even near your circle. Of course, a lot of people like to say, well, God would have never killed those people, you know? And the reality was, if those people had died, it wouldn't have been God's fault. It would have been Jonah's disobedience that opened the door for them to experience that measure of judgment. All right? So let's not be disobedient. Let's keep going. Even if what the Father tells you feels uncomfortable and feels crazy. Let me get off of that and keep going. All right. So next, as we move into the next chapter, this is the part that most of us know about the story of Jonah, right? We know that Jonah was that he was in a fish, you know. So the Father prepared, according to the text, the Father prepared a great fish to swallow him. And so you can kind of read and greet your own revelation of what that looks like and walk through what that looks like. But I'm just going to tell you what the King James, what the text says. And so it shows us in chapter 2 that Jonah, he goes through a process while he's in this water, whether he's in the fish when he's going through this process or not just yet. It doesn't really matter, but he's going through a process, and through that process, it says he sees the bottoms of the mountains, like he's going low. He sees the bars of the earth. Why does the earth have bars? You can think about that and study that out yourself. So he's seeing all of this. He's experiencing this depth and this darkness that he's never experienced before. And the text tells us that he was so overcome by what he had experienced that his soul fainted. All right. And when this happened, it tells us that he remembered the Father. He decreed thanksgiving unto the Father and decreed that only salvation comes from him. And the Father turned his situation around, and the fish spit out Jonah on the land. All right. And so after this, we see the Father is now giving Jonah another chance. So even if you're disobedient right now or have been in the past, you can go back, you can come out the fish, and you can get another opportunity. All right. So we see here that Jonah is given another chance to be obedient. And now the Father is telling him again, go to Nineveh and preach unto them and tell them what I have said. Jonah this time is obedient. He arrives in the city of Nineveh, and he tells the people of the Ninevites, the people of Nineveh, that in 40 days the city will be overrun, will be sieged, will be taken down, and all that stuff. And the text says that the people of Nineveh, they believed the Father because they received the prophet. Let me pause right here for a second. Man, this just hit me. The Ninevites believed the Father through the word of the prophet. But all the books of prophecy that we've read up until this point, they tell us that the children of Israel did not receive the prophet. They did not believe the prophet. They did not accept the word of the prophet, and they were going into judgment. Is that not what it said? That they were going into captivity. But here we see that the Ninevites, the people who had no covenant, who had no knowledge, who had no relationship, they believed what the Father told them through the prophet. And so when we get into the New Testament, the Messiah says that a prophet is not without honor in his own home. Maybe he's speaking about something that Israel had been showing and validating the entirety of this time. That those prophets weren't honored because they were so familiar with them. That they were so familiar with the Father that they didn't follow his word. Let me get off of that. But here we have the Ninevites. And now they are saying, yes, we receive the word of the Father. We believe what the prophet has spoken. They proclaimed a fast. They humbled themselves, is what it says. They put on sackcloth. They humbled themselves. Even the king did this. It said everyone, from least to the greatest, in the kingdom, they followed this instruction. And because of this, it tells us that the Father saw what they had done, and he repented for the evil that he had decreed upon them. And he did not do it. So the people, the Assyrians, that Jonah didn't want to go to because they were the heathens. These were the people who actually listened. The heathens were the ones who actually listened. And they were the ones who actually received mercy. They were the ones who actually didn't receive the judgment when the Father's people didn't even receive the prophets. and judgment was forced to be levied on them. Let's think about this. What can we learn from how the Ninevites handled their situation versus what we've seen happening prior to this? Prophesied prior to this. Because when this was going on, Jerusalem hadn't fallen, Israel hadn't fallen. It was a time, Judah hadn't fallen. It was a time of great prosperity in Israel. This was a great time for them. This was a good, amazing time for them. But we have the Ninevites who are actually being obedient to the Father. Let me get off of that. And so ultimately, Jonah is not happy about this. He tells the Father that this was the reason that he did not come to Nineveh in the first place. He knew that the Father was going to be merciful and kind to those people, and he didn't feel like he should do that. He didn't feel like those people were worthy or that they should receive that. So Jonah goes out of the city, and so it tells us that he tries to find some shade. And it said that the Father prepared a gourd for him. And so a gourd, when I looked it up, is the best I could find was that it was like a plant with leaves. So essentially like a vine maybe with leaves, or maybe like a small tree or something like that. But anyway, the gourd provided shade and a shadow from the sun for him. And he's out in the desert or whatever. And so now he has this shade and it brings comfort to him. The sun isn't beating on his head, And so Jonah he's happy about that. But the next day, the text tells us that the Father removed the gourd that he had given him, and now he doesn't have that shade protection. He doesn't have that shaded protection anymore, and the sun is now beating and blasting on him, and Jonah's frustrated by it. And the Father uses this gourd, he uses this plant, he uses this shade as a sign for how Jonah mourned the loss of the gourd. He mourned the loss of the plant, of the tree, of this personal shade that he received, this personal relief that he received. He mourned that thing, but he did not care about the city of Nineveh nor the people. And what the text tells us, that there were more than 120,000 people there who had no idea who the Father was and could not even discern between their right hand and left hand. And Jonah mourned this plant more than the people of the city being reached. And I believe this shows us that the Father wants us to care about the people. To not be so caught up on camps or nothing like that, but to really care about the people and not care more about how it benefits us, in reality. So, okay. That's the book of Jonah. I can talk about the book of Jonah for a week, but we're not going to do that. All right. So let's move into the book of Micah, and then we'll be finished up for this evening. All right. Let's move into the book of Micah. And so Micah is a prophet who is prophesying during the reigns of King Ahaz, and King Hezekiah. These are kings in Judah. And so Jonah is prophesying Micah. Micah is prophesying during these times, and the message that the Father gives him, he's prophesying both to Judah and to Israel, and the message that the Father is giving him is regarding how their cities, their largest cities, I call them like their flagship cities, Samaria and Jerusalem, how they have both been very integral and promoting the sins of the nation. So they have been the place where the sins of that nation have flowed from. Okay, if that makes sense. They have been the foundation and the anchoring point and the root of all of the sin that is going on throughout the entirety of the nation of Israel and Judah, or the kingdom of Israel and Judah, the entire nation of Israel. But they are the epicenters of what's going on here. And a lot of the things that were going on centered heavily or relied heavily on idolatry and revolved around idolatry. And so let's go ahead and move throughout the text. And so because of this, because of what we just decreed or talked about, the Father decrees that he's going to come and he's going to lay judgment on Samaria. Samaria is the city of the epicenter of Israel. And he's gonna make this city that was once a bustling city, once a great city, he's gonna come against. He's gonna make it a place of ruin. The text 10 tells us that he's going to come against Jerusalem in this same manner. So Jerusalem is the epicenter for Judah, the kingdom of Judah. And so now the Father's going to come against these places, and he is going to completely ruin them and lay waste to them because of the things and the sins that they have caused his people to commit. And so when Micah is prophesying all of this, it is well before the fall of Judah, and the burning of Jerusalem. Is before those things have happened that we saw over in the book of Jeremiah. And so he's prophesying these things into the future. But while, throughout the course of his entire prophetic assignment, those years, Israel does fall in that time. So we see some of the fulfillment there. But also as chapter 1 ends at the beginning of the book of Micah, we see that there is a reference to the children of Israel going into captivity or exile. So I'll say all that to say that, like, Micah is prophesying during a kind of extended period or extended season of time where we see Israel go into captivity, but not before he prophesies this. And then we see Judah almost going to captivity while he was still prophesying. But all of those things have not happened when we see this going forward here. But it brings us into chapter 2. We see, like, this theme here is continued, where the Father is upset with the posture of the people and how they have thought and planned out only evil. It speaks about how they use their power. It's talking to the wealthy of the nation, how they use their power and their strength and their wealth to steal and pillage from people, just because they could. There was really no reason for it other than the opportunity presented itself, and they knew they could do it. And because of this, evil is going to come upon them, just like they brought evil upon others. And so Micah prophesying this upsets the people. It upsets the rulers, it upsets the wealthy, it upsets the leaders of the nation, and they push back on him and they tell him not to decree such things because these things will never happen to them. Their posture, listen to this is their posture. Their posture is that no matter what things they did, the things that Micah is speaking over them can never happen to them because they are the Father's people. The issue that we run into here with that mindset is that you are only the Father's people as far as you are aligned to the Father's instructions for his people. And those instructions do not include pillaging people or stealing from them. And so when they walked away from the obedience, they walked away from all of the promises of protection or not seeing the wrath and all these things. They walked away from that. But here they are decreeing telling Micah to be quiet, opposite of what we saw in Jonah, right? They're telling Micah to be quiet because they don't want to change. They don't want they decree that these things won't happen to them. Well, the Father pushes back and tells them that it is time for them to leave this nation, this city. It's time for them to leave because of how they sinned and polluted the land. And now they only want prophets who will tell them what they want to hear and tell them that the evil they're doing is actually good. And so we see here a prophecy, a decree go forth that the Father is going to actually rid the nation of those false prophets as well. That those prophets who were once able to see and once able to hear and once able to receive from the Father, that have no longer aligned themselves with his truth, that there will be a darkness that begins to cover them, and they won't have that spiritual sight and spiritual foresight and insight any longer. He tells them that he's gonna take them out of this land. They're gonna go into captivity. But even with all of this, we see a decree that the Father is gonna gather Jacob back as a remnant, the obedient ones, the aligned ones, as a remnant, and he's going to cause them to dwell in the land again. So as a theme that we continue to see throughout these prophetic books is that the Father, even though there is judgment that is coming upon this place, he is continuing to affirm a hope in his people that there is a regathering and a remnant that will come back, and it will come back even stronger than it was once before. All right. And he prophesies here that there will be a breaker in chapter 2, that there will be a breaker that will come from the Father and rescue them from their captivity. And one of the translations even says that the Lord himself will come and guide them out of captivity and back into back to the land that the Father had given them and was removing them from. This continues into chapter 3, where we see the prophet continue, well, the father through the prophet continuing to address the leaders and the prophets of the nation, just about how they even ended up in this situation in the first place, and how it was their fault for leading those people into these disobedient places. It says that they have done these things, and because of that, when they are crying out to the Father, they told Micah not to, that these things would never happen to them. But now, when they cry out to the Father in their times of need, He will hide His face from them because of these things. So now the Father has shown them through the prophet, or spoke to them through the prophet, that He is removing Himself from these people. He's removing His availability from them because of the actions that they have chosen to take. He goes on to address the prophets who we just talked about, who there's going to be a darkness that comes. These prophets have led the people away. They have led the people, and they've only prophesied things to the good things to the people who could feed them, or good things to the people who could provide for them. And this is they've only prophesied to the people who had money. The priests have only taught to the people who've had money. The prophet, the rulers have only judged rightly to those who had money. Like everything, according to the text, everything was about the ability that you had to do for them to receive from the Father. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole of how we see that today, but it is still something that we see running rampant throughout our nations today, especially in the church. But the text tells us that because these leaders were operating in this way, that was the foundation and the reason why Jerusalem and Zion were going to be plowed like a field and become a ruin. I don't know about you, but I do not want anywhere where I am to be plowed like a field, okay? I don't want my neighborhood to be plowed like a field. I don't want my state or my city or my folks, territory, nothing like that. I don't want any of that to be plowed like a field because of decisions that we made. Like, I don't want that type of judgment. Might want it, but I don't. It goes on to tell us that in the last days that there will be a mountain, and the house of the Father will be established and exalted in this mountain. So in this Mount Zion, where it was once plowed, this is going to be the place that the Father comes back and then dwells and establishes His house. Okay. We also see this prophecy over in Ezekiel, where it talks about Ezekiel is taken in the spirit and shown this house on the top of the mountain. I'm just trying to make sure that we're seeing the continuity of the text. And it tells us that people in many nations will flow to this mountain and worship the Father there. And that the Father decrees that in that day, He will gather all those who have been exiled, and they will become a strong nation again, and the Father will reign over them from Mount Zion forever, and Jerusalem will be restored. All right. But even though this is to come in the future, He's still telling them, like, hey, because all these things are kind of going on simultaneously. And so He's prophesying judgment, then prophesying that He's going to regather His people. But what He tells them, like, but hey, this is going to come in the future, but right now you got to leave, okay? You got to leave the city. You have to go into captivity because of the actions of the people and the leaders and the nation and the blood that was shed. And there has to be judgment that goes forth. So you have to go into captivity, speaking to Judah here. But He tells them that even while you are in captivity, He will continue to redeem them and deliver them from their enemies, all right? And this is where we see in chapter 5 a leader, the prophecy of a leader who's going to come out of Bethlehem, who we now know as the Messiah, and who's going to have everlasting origins. And the Messiah, or this leader is going to come, and he will now, even though the people of Israel will be given up into the enemies, once this time of travail, once this time when the woman has travailed and delivered the child, once that time comes to an end, the remnant will then be brought forth by this leader, and this leader will stand in the strength of the Father, and in the name of the Father is going to lead His people back to their place. All right, He's going to be their place of peace, and He is going to be their deliverer, and He's going to deliver them from the Assyrians, and all the enemies of the Father's people are going to be cut off. So we see that even like here, He's telling them, like, hey, you got to go away for a period of time because of everything that's happened, but still know that, hey, from Zion, I'm going to rule over you. I'm going to gather you back. I'm going to bring you. You're going to be stronger than ever. And just so you know that this is going to happen, I'm also going to bring a deliverer. I'm going to bring a I'm going to bring a leader from Bethlehem whose origins are everlasting, which means that his origins are eternal. All right, his origins are everlasting, and then that leader is going to come, and once this season has ended, this season of travail has ended, going to bring you all into this place of peace, and the deliverer is going to deliver you from everything that has been plaguing you, and all the enemies that have been coming against you and oppressing you for all this time. The interesting connection here that I saw when I was studying this out is that the language here, when it talks about the woman who travailed and delivered the child, is the same language that is used over in Revelation, I believe, chapter 12, where it talks about a woman travailing and a dragon waiting for her to birth the child, but the child was hidden in the wilderness for a season. So it's just interesting putting all these things together. So hopefully you guys are still with me. I'm just kind of all over the place with my notes right now because I'm like, oh man, it's like a spider web. It's like, oh, that ties to this and that ties to this. But hopefully you guys are still with me. All right. And so let me get back focused. And so as chapter 5 ends of the book of Micah, what we see here is that, we just talked about everything we talked about. But what we see here is that once the things that once propped this nation up, all right, the things that once propped this nation up, the graven images, the soothsayers, the fortune tellers, the horses, the chariots, the strength of their own abilities, the work of their own hands, the witchcrafts, all those things are going to be cut off in this season when they are removed from the land. They're going to be cut off, and vengeance, according to the Father, is going to be executed upon the heathens or the heathens, also known as all of those who refuse to obey him. And the Father is then going to bring an everlasting hope, a renewed hope to these people, for their ultimate alignment, though those who were aligned to him and those who did not refuse to obey him. Hopefully that makes sense. And so he tells them exactly what is going to be required of them as they're going forward and what he's looking for. He tells them that they should do what is right, they should love mercy, and they should walk humbly with him. And if they do this thing, then this will be their foundation, and they will be found as part of a remnant. Who, as the book ends, who the text tells us that the Father will perform miracles for this remnant, just like he did when he rescued his people out of Egypt, that all the nations will be in awe of how he rescues his people again, how he rescues this remnant and brings them back into his presence again. And we see here that there is hope for all of those who rightly align themselves, that even in his anger, it won't be forever. It's only for a moment, and that he will be faithful to the promise that he gave to the father Abraham so long ago. All right. So that's the book of Micah. I know that one was a little. I was even studying, and I'm like, man, my mind is all over the place when I'm doing that one. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. If you got any questions, leave them down in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer and respond to them. I don't have all the answers. None of us do. But if we have the spirit of the Ruach and the spirit of the Father inside of us, then we have access to the one who does have all the answers. All right. So this week, as we move throughout Wednesday study hall and Friday study hall, we'll be finishing up the rest of the Old Testament, and next Sunday we'll be starting Matthew. So go ahead, or we'll look at the book of Matthew. So go ahead and read the rest of the Old Testament books. I believe there are like 6 left. So go ahead and read those books, and then go ahead and read Matthew to prepare for next Sunday. If you want to feel led to do that, then there is a link down in the description box below. If you ever need to reach out to me, you can do that on my website, which the link is down in the description box also. And I think that's all I got for you guys. I'll see you on Wednesday, Friday at 12 Central, noon, and then I'll see you next Sunday at 8 p.m. Central live, okay? I love you, but more importantly than that, the Father loves you. Let him love you. Start before you're ready, and don't stop. I'll see you guys next time.